Hello and welcome to Hot Pursuit, part of Ahval video and podcast series. Today I am being joined by Nicholas Danforth, senior non-resident with the Greek think tank ELIAMEP, joining me from United States. Good to have you here, Nick.
Thank you. Good to be back again.
Yes, let's discuss this latest topic, which was which raised a lot of anticipation. And it is also about a very, very critical, crucial topic, an alliance crackling between an alliance of US, Turkey, also Turkey's relations with NATO. So during the NATO summit on June 14, on Monday evening after the summit, US President Joe Biden met with Turkish President Erdogan. And it had a very unusual format, perhaps, in this context, tête-à-tête, 45 minutes, 48 minutes, followed by delegations meeting. You have followed I'm sure, the press conferences, press meetings, and also, whatever has come out from those meetings. Let me first hear what your takeaway is from that meeting, from that encounter.
So, looking at it from the outside, the meeting went the way a lot of people predicted it was going to. The two leaders didn't agree on anything, and then at the end, they both put out positive statements, with the Turkish side in particular trying to spin this as a success.
Mm-hmm.
For those people who, as you said, had somewhat exaggerated expectations for what this meeting could bring, for those people who thought some kind of grand bargain might be struck where they'd solve the S-400 issue, this was a disappointment. For people who had much more modest expectations, this was fine. At the end of the day, I feel like any American-Turkish interaction that doesn't create new problems, that doesn't create a new crisis, we should take that as a win.
Mm-hmm.
If we knew
live day by day basis.
Yeah, live day by day, exactly. No news, no crisis is good news. If we knew what happened behind the scenes, of course, at best, I'll try to be optimistic here, at best, the leaders maybe really did have the candid conversation they said they had. And in that case, I don't think candor is necessarily conducive to solving any of the bilateral problems we have. But if the two sides really did have a frank exchange, were able to take each other's measure, and appreciate that neither side wanted to create new problems for the other, this could at least, again, it won't solve any problems, but it might prevent new problems from emerging in the way they have in the past. A big part of this also has to do with the expectations that Ankara came into this meeting with. Again, they put out a lot of positive spin about how they expected good things to happen, but we don't quite know deep down what they really expected. If they came in expecting, they were going to have a breakthrough with Biden, that Biden, like previous US presidents, was eventually going to decide it was in his interest to accommodate Erdogan. Hopefully, if nothing else, this meeting set them straight. It showed them that, until there was a major change in Turkish foreign and domestic politics, there's not going to be a reset with the United States. On the other hand, if Erdogan did come in thinking that Biden, was dead set on trying to overthrow his regime, maybe this also calmed him down a little bit. Maybe this convinced him that Biden didn't actually want to create new disruptions on his side. So as I said, the best case scenario is that this really was a chance for a candid conversation, and that both leaders were able to realize that they had a mutual interest, again, not in solving all the problems that exist, those aren't going to be solved, but in reaching some kind of modus vivendi going forward.
Mm-hmm. And the unusual point in the choreography of this meeting is, of course, one would argue perhaps it was Biden who chose to meet Erdogan head-to-head, tête-à-tête, and with only the translators, the interpreters with them. What does that tell us? Did it take place because the US president did want to talk boldly and did not want to embarrass his impulsive counterpart in public, perhaps in fear of leakage, etc., etc. Is that how we should read it, or what is your reading?
There are people who are far better at reading this kind of diplomatic choreography than I am. I'll try not to read too much into it. I'd limit myself to saying that, there was a lot of anticipation about this meeting, particularly in light of Biden going to such lengths seeming to go to such lengths to avoid talking to Erdogan for several months after getting elected. I think at the end of the day, as long as Turkey is a NATO member in good standing or not, as long as Turkey remains a formal U.S. ally, and let's say an important country with which the United States does have a number of geopolitical issues to discuss, the U.S. and the Turkish president will meet. That's not, this is not a bad thing. That's not a shocking thing. Them sitting down and having a 45-minute tete-a-tete, then saying some nice things afterwards, having some friendly body language. I wouldn't read too much into this. This is.
But it seems all the issues are basically kicked further down the road as cans, more or less. The YPG, YPG issue, the Syrian Kurdish issue was the one that Erdogan emphasized in his readout or his text afterwards, but they took a little bit time with it, elaborating on it, and also said that he had, quote unquote, repeated the Turkish position on S-400s. And regarding the other issues, regional issues, his meeting with Greek Prime Minister Mitsotakis ended to the joy of Greek side, more or less, because the Greek side was very tactical about it, just to save tourism, save the summer until the summer is over, then maybe deal with the issues more seriously. So it looks like at one part, Turkish official or Erdogan's official position on serious issues like S-400 is there, although we see further retreat from earlier previous offensive foreign policy, regional policy lines. What do you think about this?
Look, I think we're continuing to see the same dynamic that we've seen basically since last fall, which is that Erdogan remains eager to certainly make it appear that he has good relations with his neighbors and with the West. I don't doubt at some level he genuinely wants good relations with his neighbors and with the West. But he continues to want those good relations on his terms. He continues to want those good relations without actually changing any of the policies that have created the negative dynamics, the bad relations that we have today. And this meeting is another example of it. He was very eager to say that all of Turkey's problems with Washington could be solved. I was very eager to put a positive face on the meeting with Biden, the meeting with the Greeks. At the end of the day, though, as you said, he reiterated his position on the S-400 for all the creative proposals we've heard for solving the S-400 issue. At the end of the day, the U.S. position remains Turkey should stop using them and get rid of them. Turkey's position remains that it shouldn't get rid of them and should continue to be able to use them. It's fine. Different countries have different interests. They will continue to have different interests, but you can only go so far in pretending that you're going to solve your problems, contending that you're going to have good relations, when both sides remain very clear that their interests are irreconcilable.
Mm-hmm. How realistic do you see the Afghanistan dimension of this Kabul airport? Is it a sort of a go-ahead with the Turkish side in the lead? Because Erdogan proposed last night after the meeting that he had obviously suggested a joint control mechanism with Pakistan and Hungary. And does it sound realistic to you, or is it a go-ahead?
And again, I'm not an expert in Afghanistan. There are other people who are far more up on this issue. From talking to them, it seems that in principle, this actually is an area where the United States can agree. This is an area where the United States and Turkey can work together. Again, given the alternative, if the U.S. and Turkey can hammer out some deal on Afghanistan that facilitates a safe and responsible U.S. withdrawal from the country, maintains some kind of functional dynamic in one area of the U.S.-Turkish relationship, gives Turkey the grounds to, again, make it seem like it still has a functioning relationship with the West. Yeah, that's great. I mean, I don't think we should exaggerate the impact that cooperation on that narrow front will have on the relationship as a whole, but it's definitely better than nothing.
Mm. A final question is actually how we should see in the future the person-to-person relations between Biden and Erdogan. I think this is important to underline that he proposed, as he said to Biden, let's have a direct line, and let's not have third parts, or maybe he means institutions or delegations or staff in between. The same thing with Mitsotakis. So it seems that Erdogan wants to stick to his sort of many see autocratic format in dealing with these issues internationally. Do you think? And Biden seems to have been quite reluctant, as far as we understand, to this proposal, although Mitsotakis sounded more enthusiastic. Do you think that that is possible to maintain or go back to formats that Erdogan had with Trump earlier?
Again, what skewed things in the case of Trump is not that Trump and Erdogan talked directly, but that when Trump and Erdogan talked directly, Trump said stuff that was wildly out of line with what his own cabinet and everyone else in D.C. was thinking. So that's why, in the case of Trump, having a direct person-to-person communication came at the expense of any kind of stable, institutionalized relationship. Certainly the hope with Biden, again, I don't think there's anything wrong with Biden and Erdogan being able to have frank exchanges. I think when Biden talks to Erdogan, he'll be talking to Erdogan after consulting with, being briefed by his cabinet. He will do that in coordination with his security establishment. And again, if Erdogan being able to talk to Biden enables a real degree of candor, which was missing with Trump. Who knows what Trump said on a lot of those calls? Even when we do know what he said, again, it was at odds with what that Washington was able or willing to do. In the best case scenario with Biden, again, the two leaders won't solve their problems, but by being able to communicate honestly, they will at least have a sense of where both countries stand, and will avoid the kind of surprises, disasters, explosions that we sometimes had with a far more dysfunctional relationship under Trump. So again, I'd say ideally with Biden, a personal relationship, not necessarily a warm one, but an honest one between the two leaders can actually complement institutional ties instead of, as under Trump, coming at the expense of them.
Do you think there's some speculation in Turkish side, in Turkey today, day after, some indicating or claiming, arguing that the human rights, democracy issues may not have been touched upon during the tete-a-tete. Do you think that's possible, that they were not touched upon?
My suspicion is that Biden brought them up. He's certainly made this part of his approach to foreign policy. Seems to be something he believes in. Again, I'm sure he mentioned them in the meeting. At the same time, I think everyone appreciates that Biden's put more emphasis on human rights. He remains a U.S. president. The United States continues to have all sorts of national interests, often at odds with human rights. I don't think anyone on the U.S. side thinks that even if Biden brought up human rights concerns, it means that that's going to be the only issue or even the central issue in the U.S.-Turkish relationship. Look, Biden's been clear at a certain point, or at a certain level, Turkey's never going to have a great relationship with the United States as long as Erdogan continues to behave in an autocratic manner. That doesn't mean that anyone's going to throw Turkey out of NATO for not being democratic. I think
that brings to our related question. That's the final question. Biden came to Europe with this very strong message again on this subject. A foreign policy back to basics, values of democracy, core values of rule of law, human rights, etc., as a sort of a driving force to his foreign policy. And he repeated that again, as expected in before, during, and also the day after NATO summit. And in this picture also we see Russia and China as sort of global major adversaries, democracies versus autocracies. But within NATO, there are also autocracies or growing, emerging autocracies, one being represented, as many critics almost, in agreement say, Erdogan and whatever his regime represents, a clean cut of autocracy with the collapsed or lack of rule of law, and then rubber stamp parliament, and then media freedom gone, independence gone, etc. And also Viktor Orban, who has the same tendencies and also has more or less turned Hungary into a sort of China colony without huge investments, ongoing relations, etc. So do you think Biden can afford to be credible while not dealing with these two leaders and still claiming and arguing for NATO coherence on the basis of democracies versus autocracies? What do you think?
Well, and this is, you bring up what's the crux of the issue. We clearly saw in the 1980s, if Turkey's willing to be a strong NATO ally that helps the United States contain Russia, Washington is happy to look the other way at anti-democratic human rights violations in Turkey. The problem now, for all the focus on democracy, and for all there should be a focus on democracy, is also that under Erdogan, Turkey is clearly not helping the United States contain Russia in the way that Washington at least would like. And obviously you have Turkey buying the S-400s, but even other things, more recently the fact, Turkey's role in watering down the statement against Belarusia after a dissident was kidnapped, that resonated here. And when you can't, when Erdogan can't be counted on to support NATO and what was seen as such a clear-cut issue as that, a lot of the other thing, Erdogan says, okay, well, we'll help you cooperate against Russia in Libya, we'll help you cooperate against Russia in Idlib, we'll create a drone crescent that will somehow, contain Russia in Eastern. This stuff doesn't, this hasn't so far convinced anyone in Washington that Turkey is actually the crucial ally Washington needs in containing Russia today. Mm-hmm. And yes, there's still a hesitancy towards permanently alienating Turkey. There's still a hesitancy to doing things that will blow up the relationship and might push Turkey into the Russian camp. But at the end of the day, beyond that, the sense is that, as Turkey insists, it's following an independent foreign policy. It's doing what it needs to do to advance its own interests. From my point of view, and the point of view of other people in the United States, Turkey's going to keep selling drones to countries because it wants to make money selling drones. Turkey's going to keep pushing back against Russia in Libya and in Nagorno-Karabakh and in Idlib because that's in Turkey's interests. Why that should be a reason for the United States to make concessions to Erdogan in other areas, I fail to see.
Mm-hmm. But again, to the question, can Biden afford to ignore Erdogan within NATO, in NATO context, or in sort of Western Bloc context?
So I think getting back to this Belarusia issue, what a lot of people in NATO are going to be trying to figure out is how can we get to a point where we can start ignoring Turkey? The problem for NATO right now is that because all NATO members have veto rights in the alliance, Turkey can actually play a spoiler role, which is very disruptive for NATO. And I think there's nothing the United States and NATO would like more than to get to the point where they can ignore Turkey. And it's difficult now, but that is, or I certainly think should be, the direction of U.S. strategic thinking.
Nicholas Danforth, Senior Non-Resident Fellow with Greek think tank ELIAMEP. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me on.